Seeing that the rich man had left an expensive car at the dump, the vagrant climbed into the passenger seat. And when she opened the trunk, everyone just called her Jenny. Why? Because her name was Jennifer Wilson. But the local homeless didn't care for sentimentality and weren't keen on taking in young girls. However, circumstances led Jenny to live with them for a while in a basement. She begged, stole. Luckily, the police had their own people. Jenny grew up in an orphanage. Her parents drank themselves to death when she was 3. Jenny didn't remember them at all. When she was 6, someone told her that her mother and father had sold her for a bottle of vodka. She cried for a long time. Then a boy who also lived in the orphanage, but was a little older, comforted her. My parents threw me into a dumpster. But I'm alive and kicking. You know, not all parents love their children, and some don't have parents at all. I think I just don't have parents, and that's it. It's easier that way. Those people who rejected you, they're not parents. They're nobodies. And when you grow up, they won't even be alive anymore. You don't need them, just like they didn't need you. Maybe some good people will adopt you, that's who your parents will be, he said. Messy hair, dark brown eyes, very skinny, Mark Bennett looked like that then and has stayed that way ever since. He graduated from the orphanage and became the local police officer. Jenny recognized him when they caught her stealing for the first time. She was sitting at a table in the station, already outlined, charges and women's correctional facility, and she was only 18. And then he walked into the office. Well, Jenny exclaimed. The man in uniform stared at her in bewilderment. She was poorly dressed, emaciated. She looked nothing like the chubby girl with sad eyes, always hungry, whose food Mark used to steal at the orphanage. Excuse me, are you our little thief? He took his place on the other side of the table importantly, and Jenny laughed. What, Mark, long time no see. He looked at her questioningly. The same perpetually tousled hair and dark eyes. It took him a moment to realize that the girl sitting in front of him was that very same girl. Jenny, is that you, Jenny? He asked, raising an eyebrow. Jenny smiled and theatrically nodded. It's me. That day, the handcuffs on her wrists were unlocked, and she walked away. Since then, Mark kept an eye on her. No, there were no sparks or anything like that between them. He had just considered her his little sister since childhood. Mark was already married at the time, his wife was pregnant. After releasing Jenny, he found her the next day and brought a whole heap of clothes from his wife and mother-in-law, warm items, and the like, and food. Jenny accepted everything and thanked him. She understood that he was disappointed that she didn't get an apartment like the others after leaving the orphanage. She was adopted several times. The first 2 times, the families were troubled. Jenny was taken away without her consent. The 3rd time, they took her when she was 16, and she escaped. The case dragged on, but the adoptive parents managed to settle her in a small adobe hut tens of kilometers away from the city. Jenny ran away from them because the family was deeply religious. The foster father helped the local priest, serving as a deacon in the church parish. Jenny's mother forbade her to use makeup and made her braid her hair and behave piously. A tormented girl who had never known love or attachment, who was not used to care or any stability, cut her hair into a bob, turned a long skirt into a short miniskirt, and climbed out the window. Jenny only went to the disco and returned at midnight, but they were already waiting for her in the bedroom. Her father beat her with a belt, saying that demons had entered her that needed to be driven out. Her mother read prayers while her father whipped her with a belt. Jenny couldn't sleep, her whole body hurt. They locked her in the house and didn't let her out. They tortured her with a healing fast for 4 days, giving her only water and apples. Eventually, when her mother came to her with a plate of porridge, Jenny pretended to have lost consciousness from hunger. Her lapse in vigilance allowed Jenny to escape. She ran through the village, screaming for help, but there were no people around. The population numbered not in the hundreds but in the tens. Jenny ran into the yard of a local farmer and asked him to call the police. They beat me. They tortured me with hunger. She showed bruises and scrapes. Her emaciated face spoke for itself. The farmer called the police, and her father was arrested. She was told to wait for a representative from the Child Protection Services, but Jenny decided not to wait and escaped. Eventually, she remained registered at that house, but she never returned to those places. She didn't want to see her foster parents. She honestly tried to obey, pretended to pray, but Orthodox Christianity was not for her. She didn't believe in God. And her overly devout parents couldn't accept this, trying to break and re-educate her with terrible, barbaric methods. She had no documents, nothing. She lived as a homeless person for 2 years until she met Mark. Over time, he found her a decent abandoned house and, as the cold weather approached, took her to another district of the city and showed her the house. "I'm sure no one will kick you out from here. The house is now owned by the state. I hinted to the local police officer that you'll stay here until you get settled. I'm afraid you'll freeze with the other homeless people," he told her. Jenny frowned. She could drink a few shots, but did so rarely and only to warm herself. "I don't drink, Mark. Although maybe I should. I'm only 19, but my life is already over. It never even started for me. I was chased away from everywhere, thrown, abandoned. I worked at a cafe, so what? Everyone blamed me because I didn't have papers. They could not pay me. I never even saw tips. The locals looked at me askance, but I got used to it. And the boss? That fat, lecherous bastard would hit on me when drunk, make advances. I'd refuse. But one time after work, he cornered me so badly I nearly lost my arm. I cut it to the bone on a shard. The doctors didn't want to stitch me up because I didn't have papers. Eventually, they managed some makeshift stitches and kicked me out of the hospital. Everyone just doesn't care about me. Maybe drinking myself into oblivion would be the best thing. But I can't even do that. This booze doesn't go down well with me. So worrying was pointless." Mark shook his head. "We've all had it tough, Jenny. You should have seen how I studied, how I was treated. I've got scars aplenty, both on my body and my soul. But we have to live, fight. You can't stay with the homeless anymore. They're good people. You're wrong. Better than the caregivers at our orphanage. All right, here's the key to the house. Come in. You'll have to heat the stove with firewood. I brought some furniture from the dacha, it's all set up inside. So live here, maybe find some work. And finally get your documents sorted. But you have to pay for them. I offered you. I won't take money from you. But thanks for the roof over my head." "I'll never forget this." Jenny hugged him, said goodbye, and entered the house. It was a small adobe wreck, similar to the one where her foster parents lived. Wooden floors, definitely not repainted in this century. Small windows, double-paned, a spacious hall, a cozy room with a window, a little kitchen. Mark brought her a couch, an old iron bed, a mattress, blanket, and pillow. He also brought some dishes. There was no stove, only a stove. Jenny learned how to light it and quickly got used to managing the damper. It was warm there. In the old semi-burnt-out cupboard there were some books that she read one after another. In this part of the city, Jenny didn't know anyone. She stole jars of salads from the private sector, sneaked into basements, and took whatever she wanted. Sometimes she took canned meat, pickles. The locals lived well and hardly noticed the theft. And if they did notice, it happened at night. Jenny wore a cap and a hoodie. She knew that Mark would do everything to get her out if she got caught. But she didn't want to cause him trouble again. With time, Jenny cleaned up the house. She washed the floors, removed all the dirt and cobwebs. Inside, there was an echo, as often happens in clean, empty spaces. There was not much furniture, but she dragged in all sorts of beautiful things from the dump. She found a small table there and a few books she intended to read. She would get up early, at dawn, and get to work. The house had been connected to sewage. However, she had to fetch water from the well on the street. She heated the bucket on the stove and bathed, washed clothes. She started to look better. She found a comb, hairpin, and some clothes on the garbage, in addition to those that Mark gave her. Sometimes people didn't throw away clothes in the garbage, but left them next to the bin. People did the same with other things. The hardest thing for Jenny was dragging a chair into the house. It was very beautiful, but it had been scratched and torn by a cat. Apparently, people found it easier to buy new things rather than save the old ones, so they threw it away along with the cover. Jenny dragged it on herself all the way home and pulled her back. It was sweaty, it blew. Her food was meager, she lacked vitamins, her immune system was weak. Jenny fell ill. That winter, she almost died. She lay for several days in the delirium of fever when Mark came to see her. He immediately called an ambulance, waited for their arrival, and generously paid the doctor. She needs to go to the hospital, she needs a drip. Do it, I'll pay. Jenny was hospitalized and treated for several days. As soon as she started feeling better, she tried to escape. You can leave if you want, but your room is paid for another 4 days, the doctor shrugged. He was indifferent to her fate, much like everyone else Jenny had ever encountered in her life. Then I'll stay, she declared. She was given a full course of antibiotics, vitamins, and gradually regained her strength. On the day she was discharged, Mark drove her home. I cleaned up for you, warmed up the place. Hope you don't mind, he asked. Jenny shook her head, thank you. I don't know what I would have done without you. I might have died. She started crying then, and Mark smiled. We're orphanage family, all of us cut from the same cloth. I actually flunked an exam and shouldn't have gotten my diploma, but the guy grading me asked about my parents. I told him I grew up in an orphanage, and he helped me out because he was from one, too. We all help each other. I want to help others like me. But I can't help anyone. I'm useless, Mark, she said. Forget that. You'll bounce back. Let's get your documents sorted out. With those, you'll find a job, he encouraged. They agreed that once Jenny was fully recovered, they would go together and sort out the necessary paperwork. Jenny was afraid of this step, knowing she looked unkempt, dressed in hand-me-downs, and overall tired of sideways glances all her life. She didn't want to blend into a society that hated her. The world seemed alien and hostile to her. A few days later, Jenny felt stronger and ventured outside. There were still groceries Mark had brought, so there was no need to steal. She decided to look for something new among the items. She dreamed of finding something like a candle holder. The coffee can that served as one now often fell over, and she really didn't want to burn down her only decent place to live. Sometimes Jenny read by candlelight, feeling like a lady from the 17th century. It was a clear winter day when Jenny walked through the landfill area and suddenly heard the roar of an engine. A car pulled up nearby. The man who stepped out of the black sedan didn't notice Jenny. He stood with his back to her, and she blended in well among the heaps of garbage. What's this now? Jenny muttered to herself as the man began splashing gasoline over the car. He did it clumsily, clearly unused to getting his hands dirty. Wiping them on some rag with disgust, he promptly tossed it to the ground. Clicking his lighter, he dropped it, but it went out. Cursing, the man picked it up. He was bald with a large belly, wearing a leather jacket and no hat. Jenny noticed he wasn't nervous but rather angry. It took the bald, fat man another 10 minutes to finally ignite the cloth he used to wipe his hands. Only then did weak flames start licking at the front of the sedan. Breathing a sigh of relief, he hurried away. Jenny saw another car pick him up on the highway soon after, and the bald man disappeared over the horizon. What did he want to burn? Wouldn't it have been better to sell such a car for spare parts, at least? Or was he hiding something? Jenny couldn't care less. Even if there had been a body inside, she decided not to get involved. But curiosity got the better of her. She approached closer. The flames lazily crawled over the car, but the gas tank was still far. All right, Why not? Maybe there's something useful inside, she thought aloud. Jenny opened the door and peered inside. There was a bundle on the seat. Her imagination played a cruel trick on her, and for a moment she thought it was a child. But as she unfolded the white cloth, she found it was a rolled-up men's sweater inside. Suddenly, the flames reached the door she was holding. Jenny felt the heat and quickly grabbed the bundle, leaving the scene. She walked home pondering what a strange trip to the dump it had been. And why did she need this sweater? As if she didn't have enough problems in life. What had she gotten herself into? Jenny almost tossed the bundle into a trash bin, but something stopped her. She waited for Mark's next visit and told him everything, handing over the bundle. Inside, as she had already glimpsed, were men's clothes and documents in the name of Richard Taylor. Jenny. Why do you always end up in these situations? He sighed. But it's strange, isn't it? This isn't just nothing. Maybe he's hiding some crime? People don't just burn cars for no reason, she reasoned. He shook his head and smiled. You're always seeking adventures with that beautiful behind of yours. All right, let me see what I can do with this. Maybe it'll actually help the investigation. We need to find out who this guy is. Mark walked away, and Jenny breathed a sigh of relief. He had come to drag her into getting her documents done, and she wasn't ready for that. Plus, she simply couldn't take money from him. He brought her things, groceries, but even that made her uncomfortable. He wasn't obligated to support her. She was used to living alone, as a vagabond. But such a lifestyle was unacceptable to Mark. A few days later, he returned to Jenny with news. According to the documents, the car belongs to Richard. He's the heir of a local businessman. I went to see him, but he kicked me out. He claimed burning his own car wasn't a crime, showed me the car's documents, said he wanted to start a new life, and that car had bad memories for him. He looks nothing like the photo in his passport. Says he gained weight and lost his hair. I tried to investigate further, but I have no grounds. Without them, you know I can't do anything. Jenny shrugged. Whatever. Tell me instead, how are you, as a husband? Everything's good. Not long ago, we were discharged from the maternity hospital with our daughter. Wow, you had a baby? Mark, you're a father now. I'm so happy for you. Jenny hugged him and kissed his cheek. Mark beamed as he talked about his daughter. It was clear he adored her and eagerly awaited the moment he could hold her. He promised to come by for Jenny the next day. Somehow, he managed to convince her to get her documents done. Jenny pulled herself together, tidied up, and even used the almost empty eyeliner pencil she'd found at the dump. But Mark didn't show up. Not the next day, nor the day after that. Jenny started getting nervous and decided to find him. She went to the police station to ask about Mark. Don't you know? He was in an accident or something like that. He's lying in our hospital now. The whole department went to see him when he woke up. He was in a coma for 3 days. Doctors were about to give up on him. Overwhelmed with worry, Jenny ran to the hospital. At the entrance, a security guard stopped her. Booties! Jenny looked at him grimly, walked over to the trash can, and put on a pair of used booties. She passed by with an air as if she were wearing a crown on her head. The nurse handed her a gown and gave her a sideways glance when Jenny mentioned she was going to visit the former coma patient. He was still in the intensive care unit. Jenny, you came. You're alive, he whispered dryly. Water? She asked. Mark nodded quietly, and Jenny handed him a glass of water. How are you holding up? She asked. I have a spinal injury. I can't move. The doctors say I'm lucky. Lucky to have woken up. Concussions, fractures, dislocations. They weren't planning on keeping me alive. Who? She asked, her main question. Mark looked at her, and Jenny cursed. It's my fault. Damn it. I knew there was something more to this. Today, when they told me you were in the hospital, I understood. It's the nature of my job. And you're not to blame. You dug into this right. This guy is hiding something terrible. I couldn't dig deeper. Went to see him during the day, asked questions. My boss was there, I told him everything. He scolded me. Why, he says, didn't I come to him? This Richard and his family have always been considered criminal authorities. Although I haven't heard anything about Richard. Only his father and stepbrother were involved in several cases, but they got off. That's how it goes, Jenny. Jenny was shattered. She believed she was solely to blame for this. She should have run without looking back when she saw the bald guy setting the car on fire at the dump. Why did she get involved, dragging Mark into it? He had just become a father. The feeling of guilt kept Jenny awake until morning. She stared at the patterns on the wooden ceiling, tormenting herself with gloomy thoughts. It was unbearably painful. The thought crept into her mind that maybe she had been alone all her life for a reason. Maybe that's just how it was meant to be. Maybe she only brought troubles and disappointments to everyone. The next day, she decided to do everything she could to help Mark. She went and asked to have her documents restored herself. She had the money for it. She stole a wallet from a painted lady on the street. Jenny saw her kick a limping cat sitting by the entrance to the store, apparently waiting to be fed. Jenny immediately pretended to accidentally bump into her and swiped the wallet. It wasn't difficult to do. It practically begged to be taken from her fashionable purse. Restoring her documents turned out to be a real hassle. First, Jenny had to prove who she was and why she lacked a passport, registration, and everything else. Luckily, no one was registered at the house where she lived, so they issued her a temporary registration there. Jenny wrote several statements and was sent to various points around the city. By the time she was done, she was thoroughly exhausted. All she had in her hands were certificates. She had to wait for the actual documents. Even her birth certificate, which remained with her foster parents, had to be restored, and it cost money. Jenny complained about the prices, but not very vehemently. People were already giving her sideways glances. After signing a pile of papers, Jenny headed towards Mark. The hospital guard habitually blocked the passage with his broad back, like a hero in an action movie or a bouncer at some cool nightclub. Jenny casually retrieved booties from the trash can and put them on. In the corridor, she met Mark's wife. Jenny hadn't met her in person before, but the girl immediately knew who she was. "You must be Jenny," she said, wiping away a tear. "Yes." "And you're Vanessa? How is he?" Jenny asked. Mark's wife sighed. "Not good. He should be hopeful, should believe, but he's completely given up. He yelled at me for saying he'll walk again. He's afraid to hope for the best. But you can't give up hope. He must believe. Miracles happen. The doctor said 5% of patients with his condition walk again. One even danced after a similar injury. He needs to believe, but he refuses treatment." Jenny entered the room and told Mark that she had started the process of restoring her documents, or rather, took the first step. Mark praised her. He was glad. "I'm planning to get a job. Maybe I'll come to work as your caregiver." "Now that you're in a wheelchair for life," Jenny said. Mark looked at her in surprise. "Well, the doctors say there are percentages." "What percentages?" "You can't feel your legs. It's not treatable." "That's it." "I'm sorry, but you're doomed." "It's better to get used to it now," Jenny replied bluntly. "Don't bury me prematurely." "I'm not burying you. Just stating facts." Jenny said this deliberately. Did he demand from his wife not to give him false hope? Fine. No problem. This is what acceptance looks like. However, Jenny's attitude displeased him even more than his wife's. "We'll make it through. Don't you believe in me?" "It's not that I don't believe, I do." Mark stared at her for a long time without saying anything. Jenny never studied anywhere, not even in school, but she applied some psychological method very skillfully. She managed to ignite Mark's desire to seek treatment. The next day, Jenny met Vanessa again in the corridor. She was in tears. "What did he say to you this time?" Jenny asked. "Nothing. You restored his faith in treatment. He no longer gets angry when I talk about it. It's just hard for me. I haven't slept or eaten. Our neighbor is with our daughter now, and she's sick. I'm drained. Mark is struggling, but so am I. And I can't tell him. He won't be able to help me and will just feel guilty again. You know, Jenny, I can't stop crying at home all the time." Jenny hugged Vanessa. "If you want, I'll sit with the little one, and you can take care of things or get some rest." Vanessa nodded. "Aren't you too busy?" "Me?" Jenny laughed. "Well, yes. Let's go. I only have a part-time job in the evening, so I'm all yours until 7 o'clock. Jenny played with Mark's daughter, Ashley. Ashley smiled and behaved quietly with Jenny. "You know, I would like to work with children if I had the opportunity to study or give birth." Vanessa took care of household chores, took a shower, ate, changed, and felt better. "Maybe you'd like to become a pediatrician?" "No, treating children is different. I'm not sure I could handle it morally. What if I make a mistake? A doctor's mistake is a crime and could cost lives. I'd rather become a midwife." Vanessa sighed. "I wanted to be one for a while too, but my parents convinced me to study economics. They talked for a long time." Jenny managed to help Vanessa, uplift her spirits, and boost her morale. Little Ashley slept peacefully while Jenny rocked her and hummed a tune. Jenny felt pleased that Vanessa didn't look at her with suspicion like others did, nor was she afraid to bring a stray into her home. Jenny saw the genuine kindness extended towards her, and it made her want to cry from how precious it felt. Over the next 6 months, Mark visited doctors regularly. He had to quit his job. Meanwhile, Jenny found work as a cleaner in the local store and library. Money was tight, but it was necessary to support Mark. He needed it, especially since he and his wife started arguing constantly. He refused to accept himself as disabled, and she quickly grew tired of his mood swings, especially with their daughter still on her hands, not even a year old yet. Jenny helped by looking after little Ashley and tried to uplift everyone's spirits, but the atmosphere in Mark's home remained oppressive. One day, overhearing a conversation between 2 customers by chance, Jenny learned about a doctor in the neighboring village. Well, not exactly a doctor, and not exactly in the village, to be precise. He was an elderly man, a former doctor and manual therapist who had moved to live in the forest. He built himself a house there with his savings, kept chickens, geese, and tended a small garden. Rumor had it he had a terribly tragic fate. His 1-year-old daughter was kidnapped, then his entire family perished in a terrible plane crash. His second daughter, wife, and 2 grandchildren, all gone. He almost lost his mind, ended up in a psychiatric hospital where they helped him come to terms with what had happened. He left his job, left everything behind, and had been living in the forest for many years. However, the medical path never left the man, and he continued to help people to this day, treating backs and even handling complex cases. An elderly lonely grandmother had fallen and broken her hip. Doctors waved their hands, but he brought her herbs, advised on nutrition, suggested the right pills, and even recommended exercises. And she walked again. Word spread, and people started flocking to him. Some he helped, others he turned away. Of course, everyone came, everyone wanted to live, walk, and not be sick. But doctors are not all powerful. They came with various illnesses, and people healed under his guidance. Jenny had to put in tremendous effort to convince Mark to go see him. For a month, he had been refusing, while she persisted. "We have to give it a try. It won't hurt you. Let's go together." "This is all nonsense. What kind of healer in the woods?" "Some homeless guy," grumbled Mark. Jenny turned sharply towards him. Not all homeless people are bad, and not all are charlatans. This person doesn't take money. He's a manual therapist and a surgeon. And you don't have a choice anyway. There's no need to be stubborn. Mark shook his head. No, I'm not going. Sorry. I'd rather be treated in the hospital. Jenny forgot about this healer for a while until she heard a new story from people about how he miraculously helped a boy with cerebral palsy after surgery. The boy had undergone 6 surgeries to help him walk, but recovery yielded no results. That's when his mother took him to a healer named Nathan Woods. Within just half a year, he got the boy back on his feet, and the subsequent surgeries were canceled. He worked on the boy's spine, thoroughly studying his MRI scans. He knew what could be done in this case and what couldn't. His strength lies in not being bound by the established norms. He just knows how to treat people and does it with herbs and physical exercises. No hospital offers people the kind of treatment he does. You simply must go. Mark pondered. Jenny, I'll think about it, but right now, I don't want anyone touching me. I'm tired of all these surgeries, tired of everything. Leave me alone. Mark spun his wheelchair wheels and disappeared into his room. Vanessa approached Jenny. He's depressed. The doctors warned us about this. I'll talk to him, definitely. Thank you so much for coming to us. You know, not even my own sister helps me as much as you do. She doesn't even call properly. It feels like you're a sister to me too. Jenny hugged Vanessa. That's how it is. I'm always happy to help. I'll come over the day after tomorrow. Indeed, we should let him have some rest. I don't want to be intrusive. Jenny was so afraid of being seen as a persistent beggar that she never ate at Mark's house, not even drinking tea. She only rushed in to help, to inquire about how things were going, to lift spirits. Sometimes, her mouth was empty, but asking for food was unacceptable to Jenny. She endured until she got home or to the store. Often, expired goods were thrown away there, and she took them for herself. Besides, she was paid, and she slowly bought groceries, learning to cook. Eventually, Vanessa grew tired of Mark's pessimism and simply called a taxi, presenting him with a fait accompli. You're going with Jenny, and that's final. Ashley and I will wait for you here. Take all your medical records and go, as if you have other things to do. Mark grumbled about Jenny the entire way. The taxi driver already knew these places, he had to bring people there. Just don't give him any money. He's a tough guy, he might even kick you out for that. He doesn't need money. He helps as much as he can. There used to be no one to live for him. Well, that's how it was. I heard he's got some guy living with him now. Maybe a distant relative, I don't know. Or maybe he's raising a pupil to take over. After all, he's getting on in years. Jenny helped Mark transfer from the taxi into his wheelchair and brought him into the yard of the small house. The house is probably about 30 square meters. How does he fit in there? Just a little hut on chicken legs, said Mark. Suddenly, a voice came from behind. It's enough for me. But you probably already know that. Come in. I installed the ramp a year ago. People often come to me in wheelchairs. Welcome to the hut on chicken legs. The healer turned out to be a sturdy gray-haired man with a straight posture and muscular arms, looking like he was in his 60s from a fashion magazine cover. My name is Nathan, he said after a long study of medical conclusions, X-ray, ultrasound, and MRI results. He took Mark to a separate room and laid him on the floor. Jenny noticed that it was very clean but modest inside, just wooden floors, guest slippers, simple windows, a regular wooden ceiling, and a few light jackets on the hanger. A striped cat rubbed against her legs. Suddenly, a man entered the door. He put the gun on the floor and put the shot hair on the table. Jenny grimaced. She felt sorry for the animal. Good afternoon, she greeted him. Good one, indeed. This rascal of ours dug up all the beds. And now he'll be our tasty dinner. I'm Richard. Memories from 6 months ago flashed through Jenny's mind. The documents she found in the car belonged to him. She remembered well his face from the passport. But then who opened Mark's door? He immediately said that Richard turned out different, balding. Here was the real Richard, right before her. Jenny jumped to her feet upon hearing his name. It was rare and unforgettable. You're a businessman? Son of a businessman, right? The man looked at Jenny with surprise. Who, me? You, Richard. I saw your passport. The bald man tried to burn it along with your black car. Well, let's hear more about that. It turned out Richard had lost his memory. He only remembered having the fight with someone. There were only fragments left, facial features. Nathan found him barely alive by the roadside. He brought him around with herbs, helping him recover. Richard didn't want to go to the hospital and asked to stay with the healer for a while. And so he remained. Nathan was lonely in the wilderness, although he was used to managing alone, but age was taking its toll. Already over 60. Richard could only remember his name, and that was it. His memory refused to come back to him. However, his headaches had subsided, his vision had returned sharp. His fractures had healed fairly quickly. That's how they started living together. When Nathan brought Mark out of the room, they both were smiling. We have good news for you, said the healer. This man will be able to walk again. I don't give guarantees, I'm not a politician, but we'll fight for it. Jenny smiled joyfully. And I think I found Richard. The one because of whom you ended up in that chair. Jenny told Mark the whole story. Nathan brewed strong herbal tea, and they all discussed the situation together. So, Jenny, you saw the bald man who set fire to the car. You took out items with documents that they apparently tried to destroy. And Mark started digging around through his channels for someone else's documents. Turns out they were Richard's. I'll never forget that time. I'm sure my accident was staged. And I immediately understood that I just needed to be removed or put out of commission, as it turned out. I'm not a police officer anymore, but I still have materials on this case. I'll bring everything, and you'll try to remember. Such coincidences don't happen, those are definitely your documents. And that guy, apparently, is living your life in your house. He destroyed the old passport to make a new one, with his own face. I don't remember. Really, I don't remember anything, Richard said. Nathan glanced at the guests, sipping his tea. So it's fate. The three of you didn't just happen to meet here. Can you imagine how many threads led you here? Jenny smiled. That's true. And will you help Mark? Of course. You're lucky to have a very caring wife, Nathan smiled. Mark and Jenny chuckled. I'm doubly lucky. I have a very caring sister too. We're from the same orphanage. She's like a little sister to me. And I have a wife and daughter too. I'll do anything for them. You said the treatment will be painful and long. I'm ready. Nathan scheduled the next session, and Mark left. 2 days later, he and Jenny returned. Mark brought with him photos of the passport and items Jenny had retrieved from the foreign car. When they showed them to Richard, he stared for a long moment. That's me. And the bald man is my brother, Roy. He's bald and hefty. We look alike, we have the same father, only his hair fell out early. And he's a bit heavier than me. But I used to be chubby too. Nathan helped me get myself in shape. Oh God. I remember everything. Almost everything. Mark and Jenny looked at Richard with interest. Was it him who caused your injury? Your brother? Mark asked. Yeah, I remember his face, but I don't remember why. My head hurts. Nathan shook his head. Put away your papers, not all at once. Richard, have some tea, and I'll take care of our patient for now. Jenny and Richard silently drank their tea, while from the adjacent room came the sounds of Mark's cries. Experienced manual therapist Nathan manipulated him like a snake on a skillet, searching for pain points and treating his spine. Typically, this procedure causes discomfort and sometimes even pain, but in Mark's case, the pain was much stronger. Contributing factors included his prolonged time in the wheelchair and his weakened muscles. Scoliosis and osteochondrosis were obstacles on the path to a healthy spine and a mobile lifestyle. Mark tried to endure, gritting his teeth, but sometimes cries escaped involuntarily. Nathan was accustomed to his patients screaming. He knew they would later cry tears of joy, but first, they had to cry from pain. That was the price of healing. When they brought Mark out, Jenny rushed to him. "What did they do to you?" she asked, giving the doctor a stern look. "It's necessary. This kind of treatment involves pain. I'm realigning his vertebrae now. Started from the top, but I'll gradually work my way down to his lower back. That's when the real pain will begin." "And that's just the beginning," Nathan explained calmly. "And he'll be able to walk after this?" "Who knows?" Nathan smiled. "He said he's a doctor, not a politician." "Let's go, we'll be back tomorrow," Mark muttered, already wheeling his wheelchair away. Richard spent the whole night looking at the documents. He remembered everything definitively. And on Mark's next visit, he sought advice. "I don't know what to do. I vividly remember everything that happened to me, except maybe the first days after the injury. I had a happy childhood. Mother, father, and me. When I turned 14, it turned out my father had another family all this time. It's as cliché and old as the hills, starting a romance with his secretary. He founded his business when I was born. Around the same time, he started another relationship. Roy, my half-brother, was born to him. When this came to light, my mother divorced him. She drank, then stopped, then started again. Eventually, she died in a car accident when she was heavily intoxicated. I was only 16 then. I hated my father. Blamed him for everything. Cut all ties with him and left town. We didn't speak for 15 long years until I got a call informing me that my father was seriously ill. It was from that woman he had to leave when my mother filed for divorce. She was worried about him. Said there were weeks, maybe even days left. Said he really wanted to mend things with me. When I arrived, Dad cried for a long time because I looked so much like Mom. He kicked everyone out of his bedroom and said he only loved her. The affair was a mistake. But he couldn't bring himself to ask the younger woman to terminate and just helped her with money. Came when she asked. Was afraid to tell Mom. When she found out, it was all over. Mom wasn't the forgiving kind. And Dad knew that. I stayed with him until the end. He died in my arms, saying he was happy I was there. Said he could see Mom and that she was calling him. You know, I was overcome with chills at that moment. I forgave Dad. After his funeral, I was ready to leave, but the lawyer unexpectedly told me Dad left the company and house to me. He bought his second wife and son an apartment, left them 2 cars and sizable accounts, but he left me the tools to make a living. He wrote a touching letter, saying he believed in me. Roy had been running things in the last few years, but Dad believed I would be better suited to head his company. They had no choice but to accept the will. Roy was beside himself. When I arrived at the company, I learned a lot about my stepbrother. Turns out he was a decent scoundrel. Always looking out for his own gain and treating people horribly. Moreover, because of him, Dad got into illegal deals a couple of times, and once he was even arrested with Roy. His signatures were on the papers, even though Roy was acting on Dad's behalf. He said I didn't deserve any of it. After all, Roy had been preparing to take over as CEO since he was 16. I just left, turned my back on Dad, and quarreled with him. Roy also had shares in the company, but he couldn't influence my decisions. Essentially, after Dad's death, I simply got everything Roy had expected to receive. His property, accounts. I said he could start his own business, and Dad had the right to run his own empire. And I wouldn't mind if he gave the company to the cleaning lady, Patricia, whom he always praised and teased. It's his company. He built it from scratch, and only he decides who gets it. Roy's mother truly loved Dad. I realized that years later. It was complicated. She wasn't a cunning secretary who seduced her boss. She loved him. And he just didn't know what to do with all of it. He was just human and made mistakes like everyone else. When I understood that, I stopped being angry. Roy took me to court, and his mother sided with me and testified on my behalf. She said in court that Dad always wanted to leave the company to me. In the end, her son lost the case. By then, I was already immersed in the company's affairs, quickly mastering everything. We even managed to increase profits. After the trial, Roy drank himself to death. And that night he came to me, shouting for a long time that I didn't deserve everything I got. He hit me on the head and struck me several times. I didn't black out immediately, it's not like in the movies. It was excruciatingly painful. Sparks flew from my eyes. I don't remember anything else after that. Then Nathan found me. Richard finished his story. Jenny and Mark sat next to him in the small kitchen of the healer's house. Nathan tidied up the room, preparing to attend to Mark. You need to go to the police. They have his sweater and that passport. Jenny's testimony is there too. She saw Roy setting fire to your car, and there's evidence. They'll lock him up. Yeah, but why did he pretend to be you? Jenny pondered aloud. That's exactly why, Mark replied thoughtfully. I showed up at Richard's doorstep. If it turned out Roy was living in his house and Richard himself was missing, it would have triggered an investigation. Plus, the search would have taken a lot of time. Instead, he took on your identity and your property, your life essentially, and became you. He probably changed his workplace to avoid questions, and changing names isn't considered a crime here. Who's going to investigate identities and whose business it is? Risky move, but considering the chaos that sometimes happens locally, I'm not surprised. A day later, Richard sat at the police station, writing a statement. Jenny was there too, giving her testimony, and Mark, who missed the case, and his colleagues terribly. He was greeted like a hero. The chief helped him bring his wheelchair into his office and talked for a long time about how difficult it had been to work without him. Mark was glad to be back. When you get back on your feet, come back. You're welcome. We'll give you a job in the office. You'll be more useful from here than the whole department combined. You're a smart guy, Mark. By the way, I dug up something on your case. If we manage to pin down this Roy, who assumed his brother's identity, I think we can charge him with engineering your accident. I won't let this slide. We couldn't pin him down before, but now everything's changing. The guy involved in that accident refused to talk, but hinted he'd spill if Roy gets locked up for sure. He's scared of him. And behind bars, Roy will be less of a threat, right? The chief smiled. A day later, handcuffs clicked around Roy's wrists. He was shocked to see Richard standing before him. Just like Cain and Abel, remarked one of the officers who arrived to arrest the suspect. Your father would never forgive you, Richard said bitterly. Roy looked down, unsure of how to respond. At the police station, he had confessed to everything himself. He even mentioned his role in Mark ending up in the wheelchair. Apparently, guilt had gotten the best of him, plunging him into despair. The court promised him a long sentence for his actions, but Roy's lawyer promised to help. Meanwhile, Jenny continued to bring Cain and Abel for treatment with Nathan. Sometimes they would sit for a long time, drinking tea and chatting. Your family fell apart, didn't it? Mark cautiously asked, sipping his herbal tea. Nathan smiled sadly. Indeed. Everyone knows my story. I had no one left. I grew up an orphan too, just like you. Except my neighbors took me in, helped me out. Back then, they didn't fuss over documents and formalities, they just took me in when my parents were gone. I don't even remember them, I was so young. I studied hard and became a doctor. But few know that my life has been marked by not one tragedy, but two. He continued, when my wife and I started living together, she already had a daughter from her previous marriage. She was 3 then. Later, she became pregnant, and we had our daughter Julia together. And then she was kidnapped from us. They said drunkards took her and sold her. But we never got anything from them. Losing our child devastated us. And my wife couldn't bear another child after that. Doctors said it was stress, nerves, a psychological block. She was afraid of losing again. She cherished our first daughter so much. Then grandchildren came, and the 4 of them went on vacation together. I saved money for that trip for a year. I saved for all of them to die. It was my idea to send them on vacation. I thought they should, since everyone goes to the sea, why not my family? But I couldn't leave myself. Work wouldn't let me. So I stayed alone. Jenny shook her head. Did you really never find your daughter? No, Nathan replied sadly. They say she couldn't even be found in the country anymore. Back then, I was a young surgeon, without valuable connections or skills to help. Just waiting in line. Later, I hired a private detective. But those drunkards they suspected of the theft were already dead. But all my life, I've been looking at girls like you, Jenny. My daughter would have been 19 now. She had a big mole on her shoulder. It's a family trait. She was my only child. Jenny slowly rolled down the sleeve of her white t-shirt, revealing her shoulder. There was a very large mole shaped like a sphere, with an unsightly hair protruding from it. Jenny was embarrassed by it, covering it up, afraid to touch or pick at it. Nathan got up from his seat and looked at Jenny as if he had lost his mind again and it was time to call the orderlies. "You're my daughter," he exclaimed. Jenny shrugged. "I shouldn't be. I've spent my whole life in orphanages." "That's because you were kidnapped by those drunks." "Maybe it's just a coincidence," Jenny replied. Nathan hurriedly left the room and returned with photographs. They were of his wife. "Look, you resemble her. Why didn't I notice this before?" Jenny shook her head. "Let's not jump to conclusions. We'll do a DNA test," Nathan said excitedly. Mark watched them and nearly cried. "Jenny, how lucky you are. You have a father. I don't think we need any tests. You look alike. Just look at your eyes, your nose. She even resembles your wife." They talked for another hour. Nathan went with them and took Jenny to the hospital, where they collected DNA samples. It turned out that at the clinic where Nathan worked, he was still remembered and loved. "This must be expensive," Jenny remarked. "It's free," said the doctor who took their samples. "Nathan saved my life. I had peritonitis, and he diagnosed it in time. If not for that tragedy, he could still be working and saving lives today." Nathan shook his head. "Could be, you're right, buddy." While waiting for the results, Jenny and Nathan sat in the park and ate ice cream. "You know, I haven't been here for over 10 years, to be exact, 13, Jenny. And if the test shows that I'm your daughter, then what? I'm already an adult." Nathan chuckled. "How adult are you?" "I'm legally an adult. Your childhood was stolen. You know, I don't need a test. I already feel that you're my flesh and blood. I just feel it, that's all. Can't explain it. When I look at you, I see her. My wife." At that moment, Nathan's cell phone rang. "Well, this is the moment of truth." He smiled, picked up the receiver, and Jenny heard. "I don't even know how to tell you this. This is probably your 100th attempt to find your daughter. Remember how many girls we checked while you were working? You went to orphanages, schools, looking for a girl with a mole on her shoulder. I was afraid to say it out loud, Nathan. But even by the shape of the mole, it was clear that this girl is your daughter. And the test confirmed it 99.9%. Congratulations. Maybe now you'll come back to the city? How long can you live in the forest?" Nathan burst into tears and hugged Jenny. She didn't know how to react. Here he was, her real dad. Not an alcoholic, as she had believed her whole life, but a completely normal person, a good person. "What are we going to do now?" asked Jenny. "Now we're going to get you enrolled in school. You'll get an education. I'd be proud if you chose medicine, but I'll support whatever decision you make. It's your life. By the way, your mom was a piano teacher." Jenny was overwhelmed. "I need to finish regular school first. That's my priority. We'll catch up on everything." Since then, Nathan and Jenny were inseparable. He wouldn't let her out of his sight, not even for a moment. They went shopping and Nathan bought Jenny everything new. He had wealthy clients, he didn't take money, scolded those who tried to pay, but some people just didn't know how else to express their gratitude. Over time, he accepted money, but only if he saw that the person was well off and it wasn't their last penny. So he accumulated a decent amount. He had tried not to spend it all this time. And his pension from his work was substantial too. Your mother, Caroline, and I met when I was 40 and she was 35. She had a daughter, Wanda. She was very young and quickly started calling me Dad. When she grew up, of course, we told her I wasn't her biological father, but Caroline insisted. Wanda suffered a psychological trauma. She remembered you and helped us raise you. You were with us for the entire year and 9 months of pregnancy. Wanda remembered all of that. And when you were kidnapped, she was deeply upset and afraid. She spent her whole life dreaming of finding you. Unfortunately, it didn't happen, but I found you. I was lucky." "How was I kidnapped?" Jenny asked. "Your mother was at the market, and you were in a tiny stroller. She reached an alley when a man called out to her. He shouted that a woman was feeling unwell. Caroline went to her. The woman was lying on the ground. She said they needed to call an ambulance, that she wasn't a medic and couldn't help. Caroline turned around, and you were gone. It was those same alcoholics. They made your mother lose her vigilance, and the stroller disappeared right away. The investigation believed it was all staged to steal you. Perhaps some childless couple had arranged it with them. In those days, things were different. It was easier. It was easy to forge documents, deceive. Nowadays, everything is in computers. Jenny gradually got used to having a real father now. They went to the cemetery together. Caroline, her daughter Wanda, and the 2 little children, the twins Danny and Bobby, were buried there. They all died on the same day, April 20th. It was an ordinary spring day, but it marked Nathan's life forever. Experienced psychiatrists helped him back then. He told Jenny that he had tried to leave with them twice. The first time after identification, the second after the funeral. The trial of Roy was loud. Richard attended the hearings. Roy quickly realized he had been foolish by confessing to the attempt on Mark and changed his testimony, but it only buried him further. Of course, a skilled lawyer twisted things and argued that his client had spoken in haste out of guilt for assuming his brother's identity. In court, the lawyer claimed Roy was only guilty of taking the name. He hadn't hit anyone on the head, and Richard, who suffered the injury, might have misunderstood something. A whole legend was concocted about how Roy simply had a falling out with his stepbrother. Richard was portrayed as a greedy hypocrite who came to their father to take his money. But the judge didn't believe that Roy, who clarified all the details of the attack on Mark, suddenly turned out innocent. It was clear he realized he was facing a sentence and tried to twist everything. Especially since the witness who had been afraid to confess spoke at this trial. In the end, he was found guilty on all counts. Richard left the courtroom feeling drained. Joining his father's company for the first time had been easy. Now, after such a trauma, he simply didn't understand what he was doing or why. He wanted to sell everything, get rid of it all. But his father wouldn't hear of it. He remembered well how hard his father had worked to build his empire, and throwing it all away was simply unthinkable. So Richard reinstated the entire previous team at work. Roy had dismissed everyone, even Patricia the cleaner, whom his father had loved so much. He managed to convince everyone, and people willingly returned once they learned what had happened with Roy. They had long since become like family. Getting fired had been like a knife in the back for each of them, but things were slowly getting back on track. One day, Richard ran into Jenny in town by chance. She had changed a lot. Jenny started dressing decently, got a job in administration as an assistant, and simultaneously finished evening school externally, planning to apply for the next year. "And what do you want to be when you grow up?" Richard asked her. Jenny shrugged. "I've never thought about it. I always thought my destiny was to be a wanderer. It's only thanks to Mark that I'm alive. I didn't die from pneumonia, hunger, or cold. You know, I owe him everything. He's my brother, no doubt about it. Well, you do take care of him too. He became disabled because of me. But Dad will do everything to get him back on his feet." Richard smiled. "You know, Jenny, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't be in the position of heading the family company right now. I'd be picking berries in the forest." Jenny laughed. "That's true. But if I had known the price it would come at, I wouldn't have picked up that bundle of documents. Sorry about that. You had a good life in the forest, though. And Mark, he's only just started moving his toes now. My father works wonders." Richard looked at her completely differently now. She seemed intelligent, charming. She had been through hell and lived in hell. To be unwanted by anyone, could there be anything worse? Especially if you understand it as a child. No father, no mother. Nathan will get him back on his feet, no doubt, Richard assured. Of course, now that his legs are starting to obey, it's just a matter of strengthening the muscles and continuing therapy. The doctors who had given up on Mark are now asking to meet Dad. Mark said the surgeon begged to see Nathan. Turns out, many people have heard of him. And he's my father. I'm so proud of him, Jenny beamed. She continued to take care of Mark and his family. Vanessa had become her good friend. Initially jealous of her husband, Vanessa realized that Jenny would never break up their marriage. Her relationship with Mark was completely different. Jenny and Mark had a bond stronger than many couples, but there was no romance. They truly considered each other brother and sister and treasured that deeply. "So, who have you decided to apply to?" Richard asked, glancing at his expensive wristwatch. "I've decided I want to work in a hospital. Maybe as a midwife or a gynecologist. Seeing children come into the world every day, that's the best job," Jenny replied. Richard laughed. "You're crazy. You'll see pain, screams, blood, tears. Childbirth is a painful thing, from what I've heard. I'll see the miracle of birth, the happy eyes of mothers. That's what I want." They said their goodbyes, and Jenny had already crossed the street when Richard suddenly caught up with her. She was surprised. "Wait, I forgot to get your phone number. Maybe we can hang out? I'll take you to the movies." "I have a lot of places I've never been," Jenny nodded, reminding him that he was dealing with a former wanderer. "That's true. You know, I don't have many close people either. When my father passed away, I thought Roy and I would grow closer, but it turned out differently. I want to take you on the Ferris wheel at night, if you're up for it." Jenny gave him her number and headed home. She had never had a relationship. She had never been loved. Richard couldn't get her out of his mind that night. In the evening, he sent her a message. They started texting. But Jenny quickly grew tired of it and called him back. Writing was long and boring, it was better to just talk. Richard picked her up later that same day. A month later, there was a celebration in a city cafe. Nathan was there in a white suit with his daughter, who had received her first ever certificate. She easily and quickly passed all her exams. Mark was also present, using crutches. With him were his wife, Vanessa, and their little daughter, Ashley. Of course, Richard was at the celebration too, planning to propose to Jenny. It was a small group of people who hadn't known each other a year ago. But now they had become one big family. Vanessa asked Nathan to be Ashley's godfather, and he agreed. Mark had discarded his wheelchair and was slowly getting around on crutches. Nathan said that in another 6 months, they could think about him returning to work, but for now, it was just office work. I want to raise a glass to my daughter. Her name is Jenny Julia Taylor. We've changed all the documents. And today is her birthday. She's celebrating it for the first time on this day. Happy birthday, sweetheart. I love you, Nathan announced. Jenny smiled. Thank you, Dad. I used to think I was born on September 12th, but it turns out it's October 7th. So, happy birthday to me.